So there have been some developments which I consider to be a good thing, because the organization I'm talking about is an organization I believe is deeply damaging to Western democracy. So it's transpired that Russia Today, the Russian news network, uh, which is really a propaganda machine, has been pushed by the US State Department to register as a foreign agent. They are not happy about it, but they've had to comply, obviously. Not long ago, Twitter suspended their account, and the noose is also tightening here in the UK. My response to this is about time. About time. A little bit of background about RT. RT formed in 2005 as a subsidiary of RIA Novosti, which was a Russian state broadcaster. A few years later, it became rebranded as RT, Russia Today, and around the same time, the Vladimir Putin put in charge one Dmitry Kiselev to head RT. Now, Kiselev is an ultranationalist with close links to the Kremlin, extreme homophobic views, and he's very close to Putin. As if it wasn't obvious, from its inception, RT has been pushing an anti-Western agenda, and anyone that can't honestly see that at this stage, I don't know how you can get through to them, because it's not a case of RT is simply criticizing the West. There is a total lack of balance. In their initial inception, the idea was to promote a more fair image of Russia, because they contended that Western media outlets portrayed Russia in a negative light. But if this was a simple case of balancing things out, then you would think that they would have at least had some balance. Okay, show the positive side, but don't hide away from also criticizing the Kremlin. Now, that's something that they've utterly failed to do. Kaselev was a staunch supporter of Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, which incidentally, as the Prime Minister pointed out, was the first time since World War II that a European country had part of its territory illegally annexed since World War II. Um, it's very clear to anyone who looks at RT objectively that this is a network that is motivated not by truth but by ultranationalism. Consider this: every single report they have on European countries and on North American countries is negative. They will do their level best to inject the most negative portrayal possible. The recent Catalan crisis, the ongoing Catalan crisis, is an example of this. So, what does R2T do? It goes into overdrive to present Spain as a European country in the most negative light possible. They will repeatedly show pro Catalan views. They will make out the Spanish to be monsters. They've done the same thing during the Scottish independence referendum. Um, the agenda is clear. RT, as a branch of the Russian Foreign Ministry, wants to destabilize Western countries by projecting an extremely negative image of internal unrest. Now, I wouldn't have an issue with RT reporting these things if it also reported, for example, the huge demonstrations in Moscow against Putin. They will never do that. And that is what is strikingly obvious about RT. They never, ever criticize the Russian government. Now, you could argue that the BBC doesn't do enough to broadcast protests in this country. And I would say, fair enough, maybe they should report that more. But what you can't accuse the BBC of is being a stooge of the British government. They're not. In fact, very often the BBC has been accused of having a left wing bias, much to the contention of Conservative MPs. So that's a big difference. RT has acted with impunity for years. It's been promoting the most vitriolic anti Western reports. It has interviewed conspiracy theorists and held them up as to be some sort of experts on policy matters. And its agenda is just blatantly obvious. So I think this is good that we are finally starting to see this propaganda network for what it is. RT is not a credible media source. It's an aggressive ultranationalist mouthpiece for the Kremlin, and it's about time we saw it as that. And when I see people, RT viewers, on their comments thread, they're so they're so seem to be so incapable of thinking for themselves. They're like sheep. Their contention whenever RT is challenged is what about RE? What about CNN? What about the BBC? Well, I'm not here to defend the other networks. Every big network has its flaws and every big network has biases. But RT doesn't even try to hide its bias. And the audacity and arrogance of these people to go onto the streets of London or New York and basically try to sow up discontent and sow up animosity in the way that they do is despicable. Personally, if I was the Prime Minister, I would seriously reprimand any MP that spoke to this propaganda mouthpiece. And I think it's quite telling that Jeremy Corbyn's number two, in fact, Jeremy Corbyn himself, both Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell have appeared on this propaganda network. Now, this is a complete um, contradiction to their claims to be all about human rights when they're basically allowing themselves to be puppets for a pretty totalitarian and autocratic regime that has bullied smaller countries for years, that has illegally annexed another country, that has shamelessly armed a murderous regime in Syria, and that has brutally crushed dissent. I mean, this goes on. And it's very striking that those sort of people who slavishly defend RT also see Putin as some sort of demigod. There is a real personality cult around Putin, and RT has helped that by refusing to scrutinize him. Now, they don't actively praise Putin, but they never ever scrutinize him. So, my issue with RT is not that it criticizes issues going on in the West, it's that it utterly fails to do the same for Russia. And the only plausible conclusion to this is that it is a propaganda network. So I think it is a good thing that they're finally being stood up to, because the fact of the matter is, Western networks don't have the same sort of freedom in Russia that Russia Today and other Kremlin mouthpieces have in the West. Now, I've heard that Alex Salmond is going to host a so called talk show. David Cameron and other public figures have had the good sense to refuse to appear on it. Why? Because it's being funded by RT. Alex Salmond claims he's going to have editorial independence. Well, think about it. This is the figurehead of a separatist movement in a Western country that's being funded by a hostile foreign state. I mean, David Cameron, of course, he's not going to appear on that. It would be crazy. Um, and Alex Salmond's either being incredibly naive or he's deliberately lying through his teeth that he has independence on this. Um, if you look at the sort of people that RT invites onto the program, there are always people who have some sort of grudge against Western governments. Either they were dismissed or they're conspiracy theorists. And they hold up these people to be purveyors of absolute truth, like they know everything. RT will never allow different opinions. They will never allow people who are critical of the Russian government to appear on their show. And you get these Western journalists, I think they're utterly despicable, who basically act as quislings for Russia Today. They appear on this Russian propaganda network and they have the audacity to criticize transparency in the West. As far as I'm concerned, they should renounce their British or American citizenship. And there have been a few examples of RT journalists quitting on air. I forget her name now, but there was a journalist who bravely did quit on air because she could see what was going on, the sort of propaganda that was being used during the Ukraine crisis, and she bravely quit on air. I say bravely because it's always brave to stand up to an autocratic regime. So, yeah, I think this is a good thing. Of course, Russia's going to hit back. Of course, Russia's going to put restrictions on Western networks. So be it. So be it. I think that, Russia has polarized itself in terms of what it's been doing in Europe over the last few years. And it's utterly shameful behavior in Syria. I mean, when history comes to be written, let us not forget the role that Russia has played in Syria. And far from standing up to terrorists, it has armed a murderous regime that has gassed its own people. And today, Russia stood in the way of a UN investigation. It vetoed a UN investigation into the use of chemical weapons. I think that shows you where Russia's moral compass lies. So I consider this good news and long overdue. I think it would be great if RT was blocked in this country altogether. Now, a final point, people will say, oh, but Nathan, if you're all for free speech, isn't this hypocritical to say that RT should be blocked? The point is, RT is not a balanced news source. If RT was simply a Russian network that happened to have critical opinions of the West, that would be one thing. If they balanced it, if they balanced it by scrutinizing the Russian government, that would be fine. But they don't. The fact of the matter is, RT is essentially part of the Russian government. It's not an independent news source. And anyone that thinks it is deluded.